I think the biggest achievement is on the political front. For the first time in 25 years, we have an internationally binding treaty which every major country in the world has signed up to, and which gives the leadership which many actors, particularly financial actors, were saying wasn't there. And for so long as it wasn't there, they couldn't move, could they? Now they have not got that excuse any longer. The leadership is there, and it's a very strong leadership. It's a quantified leadership, and as I say, all of the major countries in the world. And in parallel to that process, what you have also had, and I think it's as important, is an acceleration in the awareness of the risks of doing nothing. People have suddenly become much more conscious of the costs of doing nothing on the one side, and on the other side they become much more aware of the benefits of doing something now rather than waiting 10, 12 years. And this is particularly so in the financial community, which is the community I know, the industry I know. People are quite inclined to think long term in that industry, and they are making investments today they will be living with for the next 20 or 30 years in some cases. And what they have now understood is that in 20 or 30 years, a world which is not decarbonized will almost certainly be a world which is not habitable, first of all, in large parts. And second of all, it's a world whose financial system will have crashed. So these are very strong messages. And then we have a kind of an in-between piece, an in-between process, which is to do with regulation. Governments, France in particular, others falling in China, are providing hands-on specific guidance to the investment industry, and also indeed to the owners of the assets, energy assets, transport assets, which we have got to decarbonize. I think part of that comes from what I was just talking about, a stronger regulatory environment. Governments are still learning how to do this. We have a lot of international initiatives coming through now, the Financial Stability Board and the UNEP fee work, the UNEP inquiry, which will show us the way, which will shine the torch, if you like, into what's still quite a dark space, and we're not quite sure how it all looks. But we will have to develop a whole new toolbox of regulations, which will have to be enforced. So all actors in the economy, the people who are building assets, energy assets, transport assets, other kinds of assets, and the people who are financing those assets will be obliged to do them in a green way. So that's one part of mainstreaming, and I think the other part of mainstreaming is also to make sure that the signals are right for the market. The market signals are good. At the moment we still have some very perverse things going on in the world. We don't charge for carbon emissions, we don't price for carbon, so people can build a coal-fired power station and they don't pay for the environmental damage they're doing. And on the other side, people who build a clean plant, which is avoiding the coal, they don't get any benefit for what is sometimes still the higher technology. In many places the technology costs are now quite competitive, but in other places it's not. We still have a gap between the old technology and the new green technology. And if we had good carbon pricing, that would help close that gap. The other thing we need to do is to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. Many places have subsidized their coal and their oil and their petroleum and their gas, and they encourage an artificially high level of demand and therefore an artificially high level of environmental damage. So this is pricing signals, I would say, regulation, pricing signals, and then the third thing is basically just to learn to create awareness about good practice. Banks should systematically carbon footprint their portfolios. Every industrial company should know exactly how much carbon it's producing and how much other environmental damage it's producing, and should be able to track it from year to year. And that's partly a question of regulation, but that's partly a question of learning and being aware, and it's a question of shareholder pressure as well. So shareholder pressure will be very important in making these changes of behavior happen. There is no single one-size-fits-all answer to that question. I think in certain places, certain markets, maybe certain sectors, those funds have played quite an important role. But globally speaking, it's not so significant financially, actually. The amounts are quite small. and the usages have been rather limited. You have some conspicuous exceptions here in Morocco, amongst other places, where spectacular, impressive demonstration projects have been built partially with the benefit of those funds. But there's a downside to that as well. We justify that by saying that we need to sometimes subsidize the cost of higher technologies. We justify that by saying that in poorer countries where incomes are not so high, we need to make these technologies affordable and therefore to provide a subsidy through those funds. But we do that, when we do that, we actually discourage private flows of money, because private flows will only come when the return is commercial, when they can get a commercial profit. And if the first projects, the easy projects, are all being done on a subsidized basis through the climate funds, you basically slow down the speed at which you ramp up the commercial money. And at the end of the day, it is that commercial money, that private money that we need. We have enormous financing gaps we have to fill, and it cannot be governments. They haven't got that money anymore. Even the rich governments haven't got it, never mind the poor governments. It cannot be the public institutions. We are big, but we're not nearly big enough. And the only place you're going to find that money, therefore, is in the marketplace. And to make it come from the marketplace into the green assets, you've then got to provide a market rate of return. And sometimes it can be more difficult to do that if there's a lot of cheap subsidized money. So to my mind, the value of these funds is political, first of all. They are important parts of the negotiation process, in particular the Green Climate Fund. I hope that the Green Climate Fund will come through and prove a valuable partner. It depends a little bit how it works out in the next year or two. But in the big picture of things, dollar for dollar, they are going to be second order players to the private markets. They have to be.